General Manager Joe Douglas offers status updates on some key members of the Jets as the Zach Wilson era comes another step closer to ending in New York. We break it down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, February 29th, 2024. Happy Leap Day. I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Today, we're going to break down some comments made yesterday by Jets General Manager Joe Douglas, who addressed the media at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. Every GM and head coach who attends the Combine typically has a short media availability where they get asked questions and are able to provide some sort of big picture overview of the team's offseason. They tend to not go into too many specifics because no GM wants to give away the key parts of their plan before the offseason begins. You don't want to let the rest of the league know what you're doing. But sometimes you get a couple of interesting nuggets, a couple of useful things. And Douglas gave us some things to think about as we head deeper into the offseason. Now, I think the number one story from this one is not a surprise, but Douglas did confirm that the Jets have given Zach Wilson permission to seek a trade. So what does that mean? Well, typically the league's tampering rules prohibit a player from speaking with another team, or to be more accurate, the league's tampering rules prohibit a team from speaking to a player. This actually came up yesterday as well, because if you've been following, former Jets receiver Mecole Hardman's been making comments about how he told the Chiefs to trade for him. That's actually not tampering. It's only tampering if, like, the Chiefs speak with Hardman and continued the conversation and said, we're going to try and trade for you. Teams are not allowed to speak with players or publicly about players on other teams unless they have permission. So Zach Wilson would not be allowed to speak with Zach Wilson can say whatever he wants, but other teams would not have permission to speak with Zach Wilson unless the Jets said it's okay. Why would the Jets do this? Well, I think they're trying to let Zach Wilson find a new home that would accommodate him. This gives Zach Wilson an opportunity to speak with other teams' front offices, other teams' coaching staffs, get a sense of their playbooks, get a sense of who they are, and kind of help him find a better home, help him find a team that maybe he can have a little bit more success with, or at least try and have a little bit more success with. I think in situations like this, sometimes what the team tries to do right by the player. They say, it's not going to work out here, so why don't you go speak with these other teams, find a good fit, or find, if you find 3 good fits, we'll try and make sure we trade you to one of these teams. We'll try and make sure we send you to a place you want to be. And a situation like this is logical, first of all, because, again, you want to the extent you can, I think you want to do right by a player. I think, you get a reputation in this league for being a team that's good to its players. You get a reputation in this league for a team that's not so good to its players. And, players talk. And sometimes that impacts you when it comes to things like free agency. And, it probably has a small impact. I'm not saying it's necessarily a thing that it moves a lot of decisions, but you want to be a team in the league that has a reputation for doing right by its players. And then this is a situation with Zach Wilson where, if we're going to be honest, the Jets are probably not getting a lot in return. I mean, we're probably looking at some sort of day 3 pick. Maybe the Jets can work out some sort of pick swap. Maybe they can work out some sort of trade where the value of the pick escalates if Zach Wilson hits certain conditions, if he plays a certain number of games or hits some statistical threshold, or the new team has success with Zach Wilson, the quarterback. But realistically, the New York Jets are not going to get much in return for Zach Wilson. I would, if they get a day 3 pick, that's a lot. And maybe it's a pick swap, maybe it's some sort of conditional pick, but we're not talking about a huge return. So in that case, I mean, if you're the Jets, do you really care about whether a 5th or 6th round pick comes from this team or that team? Probably not. So it probably doesn't make a difference to the Jets. For Zach, it's a chance to try and, first take a first step towards rebuilding his career, taking a first step towards, trying to make something of himself in the NFL. Unfortunately, it has not worked out in New York. And it has not worked out in New York for reasons that are, so to a degree, Zach's, to a large degree, Zach's. I mean, I think if we look back at 2021, Zach Wilson was probably not a quarterback who was ready to play in the NFL. He probably needed at least a few years on the bench if it was ever going to work. And the Jets, of course, were a team that drafted him second overall and threw him out there and decided he was going to be the savior of the franchise. It was never a good mix. And then, of course, everything that happened in the last year, it's difficult. It's still difficult for me to understand what the Jets' logic was a year ago when, of course, they make the trade for Rodgers. But I still don't understand how they put Zach Wilson as their number 2 quarterback. I mean, by trading for Rodgers, the Jets were essentially saying, we don't think Zach Wilson can play right now. And the Jets publicly were saying, what, Zach Wilson's going to sit a couple of years. And this sitting will help him develop. And in a couple of years, he'll take over for Rodgers once Rodgers retires. Now, at the time, I thought that it was not a terribly likely scenario. The thing is, when you're getting the caliber of play that Zach Wilson's providing you, the odds are against that guy ever becoming a quality quarterback. But I think, as we all know, the plan was for Zach Wilson to sit for a couple of years. So I just don't understand how the Jets put him in a position, because it's not like Rodgers getting injured was unforeseeable. I think him getting injured 4 plays into the season, I think him suffering the Achilles injury was unforeseeable, but quarterbacks get hurt in this league. It's not a Rodgers specific thing. Quarterbacks get hurt. And to act like Rodgers was never going to get hurt, there was no chance of Rodgers getting hurt. It was a really baffling decision to me to leave yourself 1 play away from throwing Zach Wilson in there, especially since you're publicly saying this kid needs to sit, and this kid's still a huge part of our future, and him playing right now is not good for him. Really, I thought baffling stuff by the New York Jets, and that doesn't even go into whether or not Zach Wilson was the best quarterback who could have been in the number 2 role for the team this year. I don't think he was. In a year that was really win now, how the Jets went in there with a quarterback they did not believe in as their number 2 guy. These are things that are really tough to understand for me. And, since the Jets thought Zach Wilson could benefit from sitting, you can still make an argument that they should keep him. I think the football move would just be let this last year play itself out and see if you can continue to work things out. But I think there are considerations beyond football that are going into this. And I think a big consideration is what's best for Zach Wilson. And I think the best thing for Zach Wilson is just to get out of New York. I think a fresh start for him may do him some good, because everything's just so toxic here. The fan base is completely turned on him. The fan base is not going to cut him any slack. They're not going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He needs a place where he can just get away. I think the Geno Smith plan could be good for Zach. Get away somewhere, be under the radar for a couple of years, learn how to play the quarterback position in this league, learn the route combinations, learn the coverages, and do it in a low pressure environment. In fact, I mean, if I were advising Zach, I would honestly tell him, maybe you should think about going to like a lower level league where you can get some experience under the radar. Zach Wilson could be on an NFL roster next year. I'm not saying Zach Wilson isn't good enough to be on an NFL roster. I'm just saying for him, the best thing is just kind of get under the radar and learn how to play the quarterback position. And perhaps he'll be able to do that somewhere else. Now, a guy who's going to be here next year is Alijah Vera-Tucker. We don't know exactly where he's going to be. Is he going to be a guard? Is he going to be a tackle? I can't answer that question. Apparently, neither can the Jets. As we continue on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets, we'll go into the decision the Jets have to make about Alijah Vera-Tucker and why Joe Douglas isn't entirely sure where he's going to end up. That's ahead here on this Thursday episode. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Get your buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Again, it's $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Of course, we're sad here because the NFL season is over. There's still plenty of exciting action coming in the offseason. We'll have free agency, we'll have the draft, but the NBA season's in full swing. You got teams jockeying for playoff positioning, teams trying to get home court, teams trying to get above the play-in line, and some teams just trying to get into the play-in. No matter what team you root for, no matter who your favorite players are, you can bet on all of them on FanDuel with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Get quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and to make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. Therapy has so many benefits. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's not just for those who have experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime with no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day, Monday through Friday. You should also know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Today on Locked On Jets, we're breaking down what General Manager Joe Douglas had to say on Wednesday at the NFL Scouting Combine. Thursday is the big day in the NFL Scouting Combine. The first group of players starts to hit the field. Everything in the lead-up has been kind of hype. Players have been arriving. They've had a chance to do some interviews, speak with teams, get their medical stuff out of the way. So it's important, but I think from the fan perspective, the stuff you're looking for is the on-field drills, which begin Thursday. A little bit of a warm-up, though, yesterday with Joe Douglas speaking to the media. He spoke about Alijah Vera-Tucker, and he talked about how AVT's recovery from second serious injury is going well. He also mentioned that he felt like the Jets are in a good spot on the offensive line, which I think maybe, I don't know that I would agree that they're in a good spot on the offensive line. But one of the reasons he said that is that they felt like AVT has the versatility to play both tackle and guard. Now, Douglas mentioned they're going to stick him at one spot, that wherever they decide to stick him, that's where he's staying. He's not moving. But he also indicated they're not sure exactly where he's going to be playing yet. So what that tells me is that the Jets are kind of using AVT's versatility to give themselves options in the offseason. I think what that means is that if they were set on AVT playing tackle, they would just be going after guards because it's going to be easier to find guards than it will be tackles this offseason. And that's the way it typically is. It's typically easier to find guards than it is to find tackles. And there are lots of reasons for that, but I think the number one reason is that you need to be more athletic to play the tackle position than you need to play the guard position. And the reason for that is simple, is that at guard, you have help to both of your sides. You have your guy to your left and a guy to your right. So if you lose, you have somebody who can help you out next to you. When you play tackle, you have nobody to the outside of you. You got to hold up one-on-one on an island. And sometimes those guys are rushing for really wide. So you have to be athletic enough to get out there. So if you ever wonder why it's tougher to find tackles than it is to find guards, that's it. But if the Jets were dead set on playing AVT at tackle, I think that they would have just said that because it's going to be easier to find guards. If they were dead set on playing guard, I think they would have said that. I think what Douglas's comments told me is that they're going to be players trying to find tackles this offseason, that they're going to be very interested in tackles because otherwise they'd just say AVT's going to tackle. That'd be a pretty easy thing for the team to say. So I think, but if they strike out, then I guess that means AVT moves to tackle. I think, that's reading between the lines. I think that's essentially AVT at tackle is their fallback plan. And, Douglas mentioned that they're not moving him because the last 2 years they've moved him in season. I kind of wonder whether the Jets can stick to that because the plan was never to move him to tackle anyway. He only moved to tackle both years because the Jets had injuries at tackle and they felt like they had to move him out there. So I don't know whether they can stick to that. And I wonder whether they maybe should just stick him at guard. And the reason I say that is I go back to a comment Robert Saleh made a number of weeks ago. And the comment was essentially the Jets seem to have this theory that part of the reason AVT is getting hurt is that they keep moving him around and maybe the techniques are changing when he switches from one position to another. In part, some of the stuff I just laid out about, how you have to protect the edge of tackle and you have to hold up on an island one-on-one. You have to move a little bit more. But I think about this. Where did he get injured the last 2 years? It's one thing to say he's getting injured because he keeps changing spots. Well, would that not mean that you should keep him out of the spot where he keeps getting injured? Because the last 2 years he's been injured at playing tackle. Now, I'm not sure I buy into the argument that Salah made. Now, in fairness, I think the Jets have a lot more in terms of player tracking data where maybe they can judge this stuff. But if you're saying that he's getting injured because he keeps moving around, and he's been injured both times at the same spot, wouldn't it make more sense to move him away from that spot? Wouldn't it make more sense just to keep him a guard? And also, I mean, I think it's worth noting that for 3 years, the Jets have told us that they believe he's a better fit at guard. But of course, it's easier said than done getting a tackle. Everybody needs a tackle in this league. Even if you have two good starting tackles, you want a third guy for depth. You want a swing tackle, guy who can play left tackle and right tackle as a backup, just in case somebody gets injured. So this stuff's all easier said than done. It's one thing to say the Jets should just get a tackle. It's not necessarily going to be a situation where they're going to be able to get one. So my guess is that the Jets want to play him at guard. But, of course, Jets have a lot of obstacles this offseason. The first is, even the guys who are available who are good, there's not a lot of guys you can trust to stay healthy. You have a lot of guys who are in their 30s who are constantly injured. You got Brown, Tyron Smith out of Dallas. You've got, let's not even talk about Bakhtiari. That's a horrible idea. If the Jets get Bakhtiari, I'm going to be very unhappy. But it's very difficult to find where the quality tackle is the Jets are going to be able to go get. Maybe Owenu from New England would be a good option. And of course, there are in the draft, Joe Alt or Olu Fashanu, those are guys who the Jets probably are dreaming would fall to 10. But, it's not a guarantee the Jets are going to be able to get a tackle this offseason. So I think that the goal should be for AVT to play guard. I think he's better at guard than tackle. I think the last 2 years before he's gotten injured, he's played guard at a really high level. He's played pretty well at tackle too, but I think the plan's always been for AVT to be a guard. I think that's where the Jets viewed him as his best fit. I think, I worry a little bit about the arm length over the long run of him playing at tackle. AVT has shorter arms. And yes, you can play tackle. There are guys who can play tackle effectively with shorter arms. Joe Thomas, the Hall of Famer, was a guy who, didn't exactly have long arms. But it's tougher because you need at the tackle position, because you're one-on-one so frequently, sometimes you need to be able to hit the first strike. You need to be able to throw your arms out and hit the guy while maintaining your balance. You don't have to lean to hit a guy who's a pass rusher. So it makes it a little bit more of a challenge for a guy like AVT to hold up at tackle over the long run. Maybe he can hold up there for a few games, but in the long run, will he be able to make it work? And these are things we don't really know. It could be a little bit tricky for the Jets if AVT has to play tackle, but may be the situation they find themselves in. My guess is that they want to play him at guard, and tackle is just going to be a fallback plan if they can't find a guy that they like in free agents, or two guys that they like, since they obviously need to fill both the left tackle and right tackle spots. Not going to be an easy offseason in that respect for the Jets. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about another challenge the Jets face this offseason. Bryce Huff. Joe Douglas gave us some news on his status, some news that maybe makes you less hopeful, some news that maybe makes you a little bit more hopeful. Tell you what that is continuing this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Thursday, we're breaking down what Joe Douglas had to say at the NFL Scouting Combine yesterday in Indianapolis. Douglas confirmed that the Jets will not use the franchise tag on Bryce Huff. It was around $20 million, which would eat up almost all the cap space the Jets have at the moment. So that's no real surprise. The Jets just aren't in the cap position to be able to use the tag on Huff, which is unfortunate because it would give them flexibility. First of all, it would guarantee that they could keep Huff if they wanted to. Second of all, it would at least put them in a position to potentially trade him. But Douglas said that's not an option. Some good news, though, is that Douglas did indicate that there will be talks with Huff's representatives in the near future. Now, I think it's going to be tough for the Jets to keep Huff at the moment. I think part of the problem is that Huff has no real incentive to give the Jets a hometown discount. Huff wants to play more. Huff's not happy with his playing time, and I find it tough to blame him because he's been a really good player for the Jets. He's produced every time he's been on the field, but the Jets coaching staff just refuses to give him more playing time. And beyond that, this might be his one chance to cash in. Players are lucky if they get one opportunity to strike a big deal in free agency. Most of them don't even get one chance. Very few of them, however, get two chances. This is Bryce Huff's chance to set himself up for life. It's a chance to set his family up for life. So the time for a hometown discount has come and gone. And if about a year ago, the Jets, I thought, could have struck a good deal with Huff because he really had not made much money. So it was an opportunity, and he was still a year away from hitting free agency. And it's always risky in the NFL, especially a guy who had not produced big numbers to that point. I felt like the Jets could have gotten him on a bargain deal a year ago, but the time for that has passed. I was at least encouraged to hear it sounds like the Jets are going to have negotiations with Huff. There'll at least be some discussion. So that tells me at least the door is not completely closed. But the Jets do face kind of a tough road to keep Bryce Huff. And despite what Douglas said, it's not like the Jets have shown a lot of interest in keeping him. Recently it came out that the Jets had not even made Huff an offer. When you think about everything Huff's done the last couple of years here, in season, he was, after he got off to a great start this season, lots of Jets fans were saying the Jets should look to offer him a contract. And, it doesn't sound like that ever happened. Even in season, there was no extension offer. So, a tough spot for the Jets to try and keep this guy, guy you should try and keep, 25 years old, double-digit sacks, played less than half the snaps. This is the type of guy I think it'd be tough to watch him walk out the door and go to another team. But Jets are in a tough spot with him. We'll see what happens. I wish I was more optimistic. At least I'm a little bit more optimistic than I was heading into yesterday because it does sound like the Jets are going to speak with him. Douglas also spoke about a couple other things. Mecole Hardman, talked about it a little earlier on the show. Hardman had some critical comments of the New York Jets recently. A lot of stuff we assume. It's always interesting to get confirmation on this stuff, just like Nathaniel Hackett, how little Hackett did with this offense, how disinterested Hackett looked. Stuff we assume from the outside, but interesting to hear on the inside. But Hardman also made headlines because he said that he told Patrick Mahomes and Veach, the Chiefs GM, come get me. So apparently the Jets were not amused by that. Jets may be filing tampering charges with the league against Kansas City. Now, look, first of all, Hardman speaking to these guys is not tampering. It's only, it'll only be tampering if the GM of Kansas City, spoke with it, reciprocated the discussions. If the GM of Kansas City made comments to him like, we're going to trade for you or something like that, that could be tampering. But I think Jets fans are not being, I've seen online some Jets fans with some unrealistic expectations of what could happen as the result, if Kansas City's found guilty of tampering. The Jets are not going to get compensation in return for this. That would be true under any circumstances, but you have to remember the Jets were pretty much finished with Hardman. They didn't really want him on the team anymore. They pretty much gave him away to Kansas City. So this was not a player the Jets really had any intention of keeping. So that could come into play. But the big thing is, like, you don't get rewarded when another team tampers with your players. The other team gets punished. And, an example of this was back in 2014, Woody Johnson committed a textbook case of tampering at his end of season press conference where he pretty much said he wanted to get Darrelle Revis back. Well, Revis was still under contract with New England, and Woody Johnson was fined $100,000. And that was like a blatant case of tampering. We're probably looking at some slap on the wrist fine for Kansas City. I can't imagine we get to the point where they'd lose draft picks, but even if they did, it's not like the Jets would get the picks in return because Kansas City tampered with their players. So, we'll see what comes of this. It sounds like the Jets are looking at filing tampering charges because of what Hardman said. But, first of all, they'd have to prove it's not enough for Hardman to say that to Kansas City. Kansas City would actually have to say something to him along the lines of we're trying to get you. And beyond that, even if that can be proven, it's not like the Jets are going to get something in return. That's not the way these things typically work. And the final note from the press conference Douglas gave is that apparently Robert Saleh is coming to Indianapolis this weekend. So for the end of the combine. So everybody who's freaking out about Saleh not going can now relax. As I said the other day, it wasn't a big deal that he wasn't coming. It's not a big deal that he is coming. It's not the type of thing because he's coming now. I think everything's different with the way Saleh is running the team. It's not not like Saleh has turned over a new leaf now. I mean, there are coaches who go, there are coaches who don't go. I have not seen anything. I've not seen any sort of study that suggests teams with their coaches who go to the combine are more successful drafting the teams with coaches who don't go to the combine. I think a lot of this is just noise. I think a lot of the discussion around Saleh not going to the combine is not really about him going to the combine. It's about people not trusting Saleh and just finding like any avenue they can to try and criticize him. And as I said the other day, Saleh gives you enough to criticize him for that we don't need to invent new things. There's a lot you can get on Saleh for with the way he runs the team, the way he manages the game, his outdated philosophies. We don't need to create new reasons to be mad at Saleh. He gives us plenty. So, but if you were mad at Saleh, rest assured now everything's fine, and he's going to the combine, and the Jets the Jets can now leave the crisis mode that whatever crisis mode was generated by Saleh not attending the combine. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week.